God's not finished with you yet. I believe that God has big plans for you. It says in Ephesians 2:10 in the NLT that you are God's masterpiece, that he is creating a work of art in you. But I want you to know this, that God is building you to be a blessing. God is building you right now to be a blessing, to serve others, to serve him, to do great things for our world. This difficult time is actually part of the building that God is doing in you. In 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 4 and 5, Peter writes, "As you come to him, Jesus, the living stone, rejected by humans but chosen by God and precious to him, you also, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house, to be a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ." So you come to Jesus, and quoting a prophecy from Isaiah, Jesus is the cornerstone. He's the foundation. It's been rejected by mankind, but that's actually the cornerstone, the foundation that God is laying, and Jesus is the foundation. And he's saying that we as human beings, as followers of Jesus, are the different building blocks that God is putting together on top of that foundation to make a great big spiritual house, the body of Christ that can do incredible, great things together. God is building you to be a blessing. It's interesting, because have you ever thought about what Jesus did for a living? No, really. Have you ever thought about what Jesus did for a living? He had a job probably for almost a decade and a half, maybe longer. Maybe as a teenager, he became an apprentice to his father, learned the family trade, learned a skill as a craftsman, and he eventually became a master in his field, as we would call it today. Do you know what his work was? Well, it says in the scriptures that he was a carpenter. But that translation of carpenter can mean, yes, like we think of it, someone who builds houses or works with wood. But it more likely meant, in Jesus' context, that he was a stonemason. Really. Think about it. What was ancient Israel like? Was there a lot of timber, a lot of wood? Well, there was some wood, but it was a desert. There's not a lot of trees around. So it wasn't wooden houses that weren't being built, but stone houses. In fact, Nazareth, Jesus' hometown where he grew up and learned his trade, because of course he was doing that until the age of 30, there was a stone quarry just outside of town. It's quite likely that Jesus worked at the stone quarry, took that and would build different synagogues. He would build people's houses because everybody lived in these stone houses there in that part of Israel. Fascinating. Jesus was probably a stone worker. And I think that's even more interesting because he and then Peter would pick up on this imagery of the cornerstone being laid. A stonemason knows you've got to have the right foundation stone from which everything else can be built on top of it. If that's crooked, if the foundation isn't solid, then the house won't last. It won't make it at all. So if Jesus is the foundation stone, we already know that, he's building us into living stones. And what happens with stones in order to be put into a house? Once again, we don't think about this. But if you were working in a quarry, the stone has to be chipped out of the rock, it has to be dug out, and then it has to be carved into a stone that would be the right precise dimensions so that it would fit on top of the other stones to build a house or to build an even bigger building. And if Peter says we're the spiritual house, that I believe that what happens through this difficult time that we're in right now is the chipping away. That there is just a little bit shaved off here, a little bit shaved off there. There's a chipping. Maybe a whole chunk needs to get broken off here so that we can form into that living stone that is the precise shape that can build something beautiful, a masterpiece. So it hurts right now. I mean, a hammer, a chisel going to a stone. That's what it feels like sometimes. There's a pounding. Sometimes it goes again and again and again. And just when we feel like it's time for God to let up, there's another chipping on the hammer as more of our sin, more of our imperfections are getting knocked off. But guess what? God is building us to be a blessing. He's doing all that so we can do great things, so that we can serve people, so we can love people, so that we are the men and women of God that others look to, that others find salvation through as they look to Jesus Christ. And God is building you to be a blessing right now.